Well, now that we've done a little test flight for both of them, let's see what happens if I try to go a little harder. Oh yeah. Ooh. Oh. Well, apparently that's what happens. Just crash. She down. Well, there you go. I suck. Be back in a minute. Everything in FPV is so much more expensive than it used to be. And that's why when I saw this drone, the GEPRC Vapor, I knew that I had to review it. This drone can be had for less than $250. Well, as long as you buy the analog version. Of course, GEPRC sent me the 03 version, which is a little more expensive, but that's not the point. The point is, in this day and age, when you can get a 5-inch bind and fly from a manufacturer with a reputation like GEPRC for less than $250, brother, you better take notice. And not only 5-inch bind and fly, but you can also get the 6-inch version. And if you're wondering, why would I get the 6-inch version? What's the difference between a 6-inch and a 5-inch? This video is for you. I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're going to learn something today. The first thing we have to get out of the way in this video is that the 5-inch and the 6-inch version of the GEPRC Vapor are almost identical. You can see here that the frames, in fact, the body is identical. They have the exact same body, just the 6-inch has slightly longer arms. And as a result, we're basically only going to take one of them apart. We're only going to dig into one of them because they're pretty much the same in terms of the flight controller, the ESC, and everything else. The difference is going to be in the length of the arms and I would hope the motors, but we'll see about that. And I've also intentionally left this in the state that it was inside the box so you can see how GEPRC ships it to you. I really love when manufacturers leave these stickers on to show which direction the props should go. This one is shipped, interesting, it's shipped with props in rotation. A lot of manufacturers ship with props out rotation because that's what racers use and people think it's higher performance. Nothing wrong with props in rotation though, but it's good that they've got these stickers to help new pilots know which way they should go. Of course, if you're an experienced pilot like me, you would just look in Betaflight, but not everybody knows how to do that. I'm also really happy to see warnings like this on bind and fly drones. This one specifically says, here, let's just peel this back. It specifically says, machine parameters have been optimized. Please do not modify them arbitrarily. In other words, people will buy a bind and fly drone like this. They'll immediately plug it into Betaflight and start screwing around with things. Like, for example, they'll decide that they're going to update the firmware to the latest version. Maybe it didn't ship on the latest version. It's a bad impulse. GEPRC have built this drone exactly how they think it needs to be, and if you plug it into Betaflight and start screwing with it, chances are that you'll make it worse, not better, especially if you're a beginner who's just buying a bind and fly and kind of doesn't know what you're doing. Resist that temptation. Leave it. The manufacturer has given you something that is probably pretty good. There's a few little things you will need to do to get it working with your controller, even though it's a bind and fly. It's not really a just bind and fly, and that's the end of it. But other than those minimal things, you should leave it as it was. It's probably in pretty good shape. You would hope so, right? That's what you paid for. One thing you will need to do is to put the video antenna here into this 3D printed holder, or if you have the analog version of this, you will need to screw the antenna onto the SMA connector. I don't have one of those to show you, but it'll come with a little screw there on the back and an antenna that you screw in. If you power up an analog video transmitter with no antenna connected, it will damage or destroy the video transmitter. And so just never do that. As you could guess from the antenna that you see I've got here, we will be testing the DJI 03 version. And it's a little bit of a shame because, well, the DJI 03, there's no point in even testing or reviewing it. They all perform pretty much the same, and they all perform pretty freaking well. It just is what it is. With analog, there might be some judgment of the video transmitter capabilities, of the range, of the output power, and we're just not going to be able to do that. The analog version comes with the GEPRC Matin 1.6 watt video transmitter. That 1.6 watt output power is pretty standard for high powered analog VTXs without crossing over into the sort of giga power range of 5 watts, 10 watts, where they get like really big and bulky and just aren't practical for use under most hobby applications. So the Matin's a pretty solid video transmitter. It comes with a new antenna that GEPRC has designed, a new analog antenna, and you can also order it if you're interested in with a RunCam Link video transmitter. That's the older generation of DJI video transmitter that used to be called the Caddx Vista. Now it's the Runcam Link. They're basically the same and comes with the Runcam Wasp camera. That's an option for getting into digital with just a little bit reduction in price compared to the O3, although the range, penetration, and image quality is not quite as good. The design of the frame on the Vapor harkens back to GEPRC's original Mark IV freestyle frame. And what I mean by that is a lot of modern frames are going with a split deck design, where you'll have one lower plate extending from about here to the front, and then another plate that's up here, giving less room in the back from about here on back. So you got two sort of plates that sandwich the arms. And the idea there is that you get more centralized mass. This back section is just a little bit higher and a little bit more centralized. This front section is just a little bit roomier, making room for the camera mount. But the disadvantage of that is twofold. Number one, you have more complex build. There's just more parts and more plates. And number two, with this frame, we're going to have a single bottom plate here. The arms are going to go inside the bottom plate, so they're going to go up here, and then we'll have another X plate here on the top. And that means that the flight controller and ESC are going to have a little bit less room to work with. But that's okay, because this is a bind and fly, so the flight controller and the ESC are just going to fit because they've been specifically designed to fit. If you were building this frame with your own build, if for some reason you just decided to buy this frame, you might have to think a little bit about the spacing of your flight controller and ESC and make sure they were going to fit. That being said, there's plenty of room for a typical 2-high stack. On the other hand, the rear of the frame needs that extra room because we've got the O3 air unit, or the GEPRC Maton, which is a little bit thinner than the O3 air unit, but not by much. We've got the O3 air unit, and it is actually mounted here on this carbon fiber spacer, and then again on a 3D printed TPU spacer. And I'm not 100% sure the purpose of the TPU spacer. It's not vibration absorption. The O3 doesn't care about vibration. Well, the camera does because it has image stabilization, but the air unit does not. What that TPU spacer is doing is holding the receiver. And I love how they've mounted the receiver here. It is fully accessible. We can get at the bind button, we can get at the LED and so forth, while still being sort of tucked away in a compact place. I guess if I ever had to solder a new receiver on or replace an antenna, I would be kind of annoyed at having to take the whole air unit off. Like, could we not have mounted it on top of the air unit? But it is a very sort of neat and compact way of mounting the receiver, and I just appreciate it on a functional and an aesthetic level. A lot of modern O3 builds are putting heat sinks, and some are even putting fans on the O3 to help dissipate heat. That has not been done on this build. So your O3 will overheat as fast as it normally does, which is to say, if you plug in your battery and set the quad down and don't fly and don't spin your props, the O3 will overheat in a few minutes, typically. But if you go fly, of course, there'll be airflow with plenty of cooling, and that won't be an issue. The O3 doesn't have any sort of protection in terms of side plates or anything like that. That's okay. In my opinion, it doesn't really need it, but some frame manufacturers do design it that way. And then, of course, it doesn't get airflow, and they have to figure out heating. So they're kind of solving a problem that they created. I'm a big fan of the way GEPRC has done this. I will say they've given you a silicone plug for the USB port, and that's cool, but also kind of irrelevant, and I'm just going to throw it away because I'm just going to lose it anyway. That's just me. The O3 is mounted by these 1.6 millimeter screws, which go up through the base and into screw holes on the bottom of the O3. And those screw holes only go into the bottom half of the O3, and I have seen cases where the O3 actually rips itself in half in a hard crash when it's mounted this way. Not with this specific frame, and I'm not saying it's common, but it is a thing that I've seen, and it always makes me a little bit nervous when I see the O3 being mounted just with these screws on the bottom. There's another way of doing it where the screws go sort of all the way down through the entire O3 and hold the whole O3 together instead of just coming up through the bottom, and that would be preferable, but also would be a lot more work. So I guess I just want to call it out in case it ever happens. The flight controller is the GEPRC F722 HD V2 flight controller. It is an F722 flight controller, which is one of the fastest processors to run Betaflight these days, and suffice it to say, it should be able to do pretty much anything you would ask it to do. It's got a ton of inputs and outputs for various functions like UARTs for GPS, UARTs for receiver, UARTs for video transmitter, LEDs, and so forth. The full complement of functionality you would expect a Betaflight flight controller to have. However, it's worth pointing out that the top of the flight controller has only plugs on it. And plugs are great for manufacturers because it means they can just plug everything together and they don't need to solder. But hobbyists often prefer to solder, since we don't have ready-made plugs ready to go for everything. And all the solder pads for this flight controller are on the underside. And that means that if you wanted to solder to this flight controller, well, you'd either have to mount it upside down, which I guess isn't the end of the world, or you'd have to sort of lift it off, solder all your wires to it, and then turn it back over and put it down again. But the way that you often work on a flight controller, where you just pop the top plate off the quad and then get in there with your soldering iron and solder everything down, you're going to have to mount the flight controller upside down if you want to do that. And again, it's not the end of the world, but it is something to note. I love it when manufacturers give diagnostic LEDs for the individual voltage regulators. It means that when the flight controller stops working, I don't have to pull out my multimeter to test if the 9 volt, the 5 volt, etc. regulator is actually providing power. It's a small thing, but it's easy for the manufacturer to do, and it does add it lets you skip a step in the troubleshooting. Here, if I look and I see that any of these LEDs are out, I'll know that the 9 volt, the 5 volt, the 3.3 volt, or the MCU voltage regulator is out, and then, well, I'll probably just scrap the flight controller and buy a new one, but at least I'll be able to get through that quickly instead of wondering what's wrong. The ESC is a 60 amp ESC running BLHeli-S, and as far as the amp rating goes, 60 amp is more than adequate for anything this drone is going to do. Keep in mind that that amp rating is per motor, and that amp rating is a continuous amp rating. There are going to be times when your motor may pull more than 60 amps. I don't even know about that, because 4 motors times 60 amps would be 240 amps. I don't think your battery can provide that much power, and I don't think your motors are going to pull that much power. Keep in mind that ESC amp ratings, once you get above, say, 30 or 40 amps, they mostly are just headroom. Most of the time, an individual motor isn't going to pull more than 30 or 40 amps on a drone like this, and that additional headroom just means the ESC can take more abuse without dying. 60 amps is a fine specification, and there's more difference between ESCs in terms of the quality of their manufacturing and the selection of their FETs, as opposed to this sort of arbitrary number. The ESC is running BLHeli-S firmware, and that is a good thing. These days, BLHeli 32, it is 32-bit firmware, and it is more functional, but also the BLHeli 32 devs have gone out of business for political reasons that we won't really go into. Suffice it to say, BLHeli 32 ESCs are basically end of life. They still work, but there is no way to do firmware updates on them, and if there are bugs, there's no way to fix those bugs. Don't buy them. The alternative is some other 32-bit firmwares like AM32 or good old BLHeli-S. And the good news is that BLHeli-S has been around for years. It is open source. It is well understood. It has fine performance. It's low cost. I think this is a fantastic decision for GEPRC to be making, although I would love for them to ship an AM32 ESC because it is 32-bit and it's a little bit like sort of more cutting edge, but this is fine. You do want to know, though, that BLHeli-S does not support bidirectional D-shot. And without going into too much detail about what bidirectional D-shot is, you want bidirectional D-shot. It makes your quad fly better. There is a way to do bidirectional D-shot on a BLHeli-S ESC. You flash another firmware called BlueJay. And if GEPRC have done their work, they already flashed BlueJay to this. In fact, hang on a second. That startup tone sounds like BlueJay. Good for them. We're going to double check this when we get over to the computer just to confirm it, but I believe they have shipped this ESC with BlueJay already on it, which means you don't have to do that, and that's good. Going back to the design of the frame, we have 2mm carbon fiber on top and 2.5mm carbon fiber on bottom, as well as 5mm thick arms. And basically what that adds up to is this is a reasonably durable freestyle frame, but it is not going to be like an ultra durable bando basher. It's like that would have like 2.5mm top plate, 3mm bottom plate, and 6 or 7mm arms. You pay a significant penalty in weight when you go to that thicker carbon, though, and there are people out there who fly super aggressively, who crash a lot, who fly in super dangerous environments like bandos with concrete and asphalt. Those people choose frames that have those more durable characteristics. This isn't that. There's every expectation that it's going to be reasonably durable for the majority of people, but it is eventually going to break, and the trade-off is going to be that it's a little lighter weight and hopefully it's going to fly a little better. If you do break an arm, it's only 2 screws to remove the arm. These screws that you see here do not go through the arm. They are the mounting screws for the flight control stack, and they're not involved in holding the arm in place. So just 1, 2, the arm slides out, motor comes off, and a new arm goes in, and you should be good to go. I also like that GEPRC have installed this chin plate here on the front of the quadcopter. That is the place where the most impacts happen. You're flying forward, you crash, and the chin digs into something. They've basically doubled the thickness here, and that means that well, number one, you could replace the chin plate without replacing the entire bottom plate if it starts to wear, and it's just going to wear a little bit slower and be more durable. The ends of the arms have these 3D printed landing feet and arm guards. So this is going to provide additional durability. If you like cartwheel it across the ground, the end of the arm is often the thing that starts to chip away and wear out, and you'll end up replacing an arm before the arm even breaks just because the end is so damaged. This 3D printed TPU bumper is going to do a good job preventing that. It is held on with motor screws, which is not my favorite because these motor screws have to bite into the TPU, and the TPU is flexible and they can't really screw down very hard. But you can see here we've got 2 motor screws screwed in the normal way and holding the motor on, and 2 of them, well, let's just make sure that I'm right. Maybe they're not. I think they probably are, but we'll double check. Yeah, no. So there's nothing else in there. It's just a TPU shelf. And so I could basically just screw that in as tight as I want. And it'll just keep compressing the TPU until there's basically just screws all the way through. Yeah, no. It's good that they use Loctite because otherwise the screw might loosen up because there's no tension on it. The O3 camera is mounted in the metal front end, and the metal front end is great for durability. Again, the front end takes a lot of damage, so having that be something durable like metal improves the survivability of the frame. But the problem is that hard mounting the O3 camera makes the image stabilization not work right. O3 has image stabilization built in, but the camera has to have good gyro data for it to work. And if the camera's hard mounted, it gets too much vibration. The solution to that is to mount the camera on these silicone gummies. And these are, in fact, they look like injection molded silicone gummies. They're not even 3D printed. Not that 3D printed can be fine too, but it's very nice to see that this is done that way. Presumably the analog camera mounts the same way, although it doesn't really matter with an analog camera. Theoretically, you might see less vibration in your FPV feed, but usually the vibrations are so high frequency that you don't see them anyway. This is my single biggest pet peeve in bind and fly drones. This stupid wire protector, this plastic wire protector. iFlight started it. I hate it. Why do I hate it? Why do I hate protecting wires? Protecting wires is fine, but the problem is this stuff shatters. It shatters in a crash. It creates jagged edges. I have cut more motor wires from the jagged edges of this track breaking than I ever have from a prop or a branch strike. There's other ways to solve this problem. I'm not going to go into what they are. This is a bad way to solve this problem. It seems like a good thing. It makes the build neat and it makes the customer happy. But the minute you go out and fly this and the minute you crash it, they explode and then you're cutting them off and you're breaking them off and it's just a pain in the ass. Stop doing this. Do it better or don't do it at all. Just tape them down. They don't get cut that often if you tape them down. But if you're going to protect them, do it with something like injection molded plastic that's going to hold together instead of this stupid frickin' plastic track. It's the same track. They all buy it from the same place and it's garbage. The quadcopter comes with this battery pad that you have to install yourself. And I often complain at this point in the review about the battery pad being kind of like a hard plastic that doesn't grip the battery really well. So the battery can slide around in a crash. And that's sort of bad. That's bad. GEPRC, someone's finally listened to me complaining, and this actually feels like a fairly grippy battery pad. It even comes with a spare one if it starts to wear out or get dirty and loses its stick. Fantastic. I could not be more pleased. Now let's go through the setup of the aircraft, and it should be pretty simple, right? It should come from the factory pre-set up, and it mostly does. But of course, you're going to have to bind it to your controller. I'll plug in the flight controller here and flip her over to find that the receiver does not power up from USB, which means we're going to have to plug in the battery. And that annoys me a little bit. I always rather have the receiver power up from USB so you don't have the video transmitter cooking away, or God forbid, if you had your props on, if it powers up from USB, you don't have to take your props off to do the binding and so forth because the battery is required to make the motor spin. But here we go. The next thing we're going to do is plug in a battery, and the receiver will hopefully power up. And it does, and it is single blinking, which means it is looking for a bind. It is looking for a bound controller. Double blink would mean in binding mode. Now, people always say, oh, binding express LRS is so frustrating. But you can easily put it into binding mode by doing the 3 plug method. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and plug in, and it's not in binding mode, is it? It didn't go into binding mode. It should go into binding mode, but it won't. And I think the reason why it hasn't gone into binding mode is, my guess is that it's been bound before. It has a binding phrase flashed to it, and if it has a binding phrase pre-configured, the 3 plug method doesn't work either. So we're going to wait for it to go into Wi-Fi. After about a minute, it should go into Wi-Fi mode, and we can do it that way. There we go. That fast flashing indicates it's in Wi-Fi mode, and so we'll go to the Wi-Fi networks. We should see it. There it is. Connect. And after it connects, go to 10.0.0.1 in your web browser. Hold on. There we go. And it comes with firmware 3.3.1. That's not bad. And yes, this receiver has been bound before. I'm not sure how. Like, do they bind every single one of these coming out of the factory and test fly it or something? Maybe so. But it means that the normal double plug method won't work. And we have to either type our binding phrase here, or whatever would come next would be, we would have to flash it. And to flash it, we would have to use pass-through or desolder it, and that would be a pain in the ass. So this is probably what you're going to end up doing. Sucks. I'm kind of tempted to flash firmware 3.4 to it. With firmware 3.4, the bind button actually acts like a bind button. Does this receiver even have a bind button? I don't see one. Not all of them do. I think this is the receiver that we've got, and it looks like on this receiver, the button is on the other side from the antenna, which means that we can't access it on this drone. That's annoying. That's annoying. All manufacturers of Express LRS receivers, the button should be on the same side as the antenna and the LED, so that when I mount it, all 3 of those things are accessible. Duh. All right. I'm going to type my binding phrase in here. I'm not going to show you what it is. I'm going to save and reboot, and we should be bound. The other thing I would say is GEPRC. I don't know exactly why this got to the consumer with a bind phrase already on it. Frankly, I don't know if this is just something that happened because this was sent to me as a reviewer, and maybe you did an extra test flight on it, and the ones you send to customers don't have a bind phrase. But the bottom line is that the customer should get a factory fresh Express LRS receiver that does not have a bind phrase on it, that they can bind with the 3 plug method, or maybe it would even automatically go into binding mode because it powered up and it knew that it had never been bound. This is kind of annoying. We should be able to go into Betaflight, and in the receiver tab, we have movement. Yay. Excellent. The on-screen display that they've sent looks pretty cute, pretty sweet. I'm going to change it around to match what I like, but that's fine. Nothing wrong there. Yeah, the configuration looks pretty good. All of the things, almost all of the things that I would normally do are done. Got a 180-degree maximum arm angle. I'm not sure why we have D-shot beacon, what makes the motors be here. Do you hear how when I do that, both an actual physical beeper and the motors beep? Well, if we've got a physical beeper, I don't know why we have beacon, the motor beeper on. Yeah, that's fine. Don't need the motors beeping, just kind of redundant. We do have bidirectional D-shot. We do have the Blue Jay firmware. That's good. We've got some customized PIDs. We'll see how it flies. Default Betaflight rates. I'm definitely going to change that. Oh, very aggressive filter settings. Wow, this thing should fly amazing or smoke the motors. No, it probably won't do that. But yeah, these filter settings are super aggressive. This must be a really well-built frame to be able to handle such aggressive filter settings. Put my rates on here. And that's pretty much it. It's all pretty well set up and ready to fly. I'm going to take it outside and fly it. Before we continue with the video, I'd like to remind you that the single best way for you to help make sure that I am able to continue making content like this, which hopefully you value, is to join my Patreon. Patreon is a website where you subscribe to me for as little as $2 a month. That's the minimum amount, just $2 a month. Someone's vacuuming. But join my Patreon, get access to my Discord server, and just feel good about supporting the work that I do here. If you watch my content regularly, then hopefully eventually you'll come to a point where you go, this guy's earned my support. If today is that day, join my Patreon at any level at any dollar value that you pick. $2, pick $5, pick $10, pick whatever amount you think is fair for the amount of value you get out of my content. There's a link down below where you can click through. And if today's not the day, if you're like, I just want to watch the video, you've probably already skipped ahead. But yeah, keep watching the content. I'll keep making the content, and I hope that day comes. Now it's time to put these guys in the air. And what I really wanted to do was fly them without telling you whether I was flying the 5-inch or the 6-inch, so that you could see for yourself the difference in flight characteristics. And obviously I was going to explain it to you too, but I thought that would be a really cool exercise, except I realized that you can see the props in view. These are not the deadcat version of the frame. These are the X version of the frame. That means they're going to have a little bit better flight handling, a little more neutral flight characteristics for acro, but a little, you can see the props in view. So that's not going to work. Maybe I could put a GoPro on there and tilt it up so you can't see the props. I'm just going to fly it one after the other with the O3, no way to the GoPro, because I think that's how a lot of people are going to do it. The O3 has such good image quality anyway. And we'll just talk about how they fly and see what's on. Ooh. Ooh, she's fast. I don't know if it's the default up tilt or the weight. Wow, that gets up there for a 5-inch. I'm just on the default up tilt. It looked about right to me. Maybe 25, 30 degrees. She scoots. If we were to put a GoPro on here, we would add a little weight and it wouldn't be quite as responsive. But it's really responsive. Just turns on a dime. Whoa. And it just goes up. Let's do a full throttle punch up before we wear the battery down too much. Okay, so not quite as much as pop as that 8S quadcopter I just reviewed, but I guess you wouldn't expect that. Nevertheless, it's got some nice throttle response, great handling. Just dive in here, dive over here. I feel like I've got so much control. Turn on a dime. Just change your mind. And that's saying a lot, given that we're going through the DJI O3, which has pretty mediocre latency. So like the ability to just kind of jump in there and change your mind as to where you're going at the last minute speaks to the quad, I guess. Good throttle control. Felt like I might be about to tap the ground there if I got behind it, but I just did the adjustment. She flies nice. It feels light. I didn't actually even put it on the scale yet, but it feels light. It feels like it just changes directions. Like I'm going and I'm going here and I'm going over here. And let's just go over here. Do-do-do. Going a little easier on the throttle now that, whoa, hello. Now that we're getting to the end of the pack. Little shudder there. That's the first time I've seen even a, hello, shudder out of it in terms of the prop wash handling or anything. It's just completely, handling is like perfect. No prop wash, no nothing. Smooth as butter. Really nice. Really nice. That's really nice. Now the 6-inch. I'm really intrigued. It's been a while since I flew a 6-inch, to be honest. I fly a 7-inch all the time. Yeah, all the time. Now immediately you can hear a difference in the props. And the straight line speed feels the same. Just, you know, where we are on the throttle feels about the same. But immediately it feels less punchy. Just a little less responsive as I punch the throttle. It's got more thrust, but it's just a little harder to manage, like dropping in here where you have to get on the throttle at the right time to, you know, not hit the ground. And it's just a little less responsive in the turns. The rates are the same, but because it's just a little wider in terms of its mass, it doesn't rotate quite the same. The flip side of that is it's just got a little bit more stability. It feels like it wants to fly a little different. But you see, if I go full stick, the rates are the same. There's a full stick roll. The rates are the same. It's still the exact same rates. It's just the physics mean it's a little less responsive. And it manifests, you can feel it as you fly, and it manifests in the way that you kind of want to fly it. You want to sort of fly towards its capabilities. And there's a, oh gosh, that was almost a big mistake. Almost hit those lines. There's a tendency, there's less of a tendency to want to sort of whip it around and more of a tendency to want to kind of take big flowing lines. Can it turn sharply? Yes, but it just doesn't feel as natural. It doesn't feel as just twitch, ready to go, and it's just a little more work to put it where I want it in these tiny, precise positions, these tiny, precise situations. But coming through here, if we just do a nice, smooth line, it's going to track really well. It's going to just look really good. In fact, with stabilization on, it would be, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Whew. With stabilization on, that would look so good. We've got stabilization off, of course, so that you guys can see every little wiggle and bobble, but coming down here, oh, see, just a little more work managing that throttle, not hitting that branch, you know? Just a little bit less confident on those small, precise moves. Another trade-off we're going to see, this is the exact same battery, identical. And these batteries actually, just by coincidence, are almost brand new. So it's not like one's been abused and the other hasn't. And we should see we get more flight time off the 6-inch. Larger props are more efficient, all else being equal. I should also mention this quadcopter has 2407 motors as opposed to the 2207s from the 5-inch. So just a little bit bigger volume motor, which you want for that bigger 6-inch prop. To give you that torque that you need for the responsiveness and authority to spin that prop. Doing pretty good, 3.6 volts. We're gonna get we should get significantly more flight time. Not like twice as much flight time, but like notably more. 3, 4, okay. So here we got 6 minutes of flight time. I actually didn't look at the end of the last one. Just a little more flight time. Maybe a minute. I think I might have gotten 5 minutes on the last one. I gotta tell you, between the two of them, just right this minute, I would take the 5-inch. That's just my personal preference. The 5-inch is way more nimble and way more fun to fly. The 6-inch, a little more longer flight time, but I just really like the nimbleness of the 5-inch and don't feel like you're giving up much in terms of stability with the 6-inch. The thing is, flight controllers are real freaking good. A flight controller can make a 5-inch fly pretty stable, but it can't really overcome physics and make a 6-inch nimble. Another place the 6-inch is really going to excel is in the ability to carry weight. As we add weight, the 5-inch is going to feel like a dog and the 6-inch is going to bear it a lot better. Let's put a GoPro on these guys and see what effect that has. I feel like the 6-inch quadcopter isn't really getting a fair chance to show its strength in the previous flights. You see, larger props really shine when you add weight to the quadcopter. The heavier it is, the more lift you need, and larger props are more efficient at making that lift. So for the next test, what I'm gonna do is add, well, you can see a fair amount of weight. We've got a GoPro on here. It is the GoPro Hero 11, not one of the bigger, heavier, or 11 mini, not one of the bigger, heavier GoPros. I didn't have like an 1800 milliamp hour 6S, which I thought would be perfect. So here are two 1300, 1400 milliamp hour 6Ss in parallel. This is the 5-inch. We're gonna see how it flies and how long it flies. Then we're gonna do the same thing for the 6-inch and see if that, I don't know, we'll see if there's a big difference. If not, then just keep flying the 5-inch. Here we go. Just like before, we're gonna start by looking at the throttle position in the lower right where we get a hover. It's at about 30%, whereas it was at closer to 20% if I remember right. Oof. We really gotta not crash in the wet grass. Here we go. Let's do a full throttle punch out and just see what that's like. Oh, it's still freaking, that's insane. What the hell? All right, well, we're just gonna fly this. We're not gonna do any like light cruising, we're not gonna take it too easy, but also I don't wanna take a chance that I crash and just put this whole parallel mess GoPro into the dirt. Not quite as punchy, but sheesh, given the amount of weight that's on it, it's not as bad as I would have thought. Holy cow. To be fair, it is a different day. I'm not flying these back to back. Part of what's helping us here is that the gigantic battery is able to produce a lot of current with very little sag. We have essentially a 2800 milliamp hour battery. I'll put the actual weight, I'll put this on the scale and put the actual weight on screen so you guys can know. I'm gonna guess that it is over 900 grams for sure, and maybe even over a kilogram. How's the handling? Oh, see, I'm getting full throttle there, and it's not just jumping off the line. Like when I hit throttle, full throttle, it's not just accelerating like it would if it was lighter. So yeah, we can feel some difference here. But if we baby it a little, we can get it to jump through some hoops, little snappy moves. Not as snappy as they could be, but for those who like a heavier quadcopter, this feels like it's doing fine. 3 minutes. We are gonna run this out to the end of the pack, and we'll do the same thing. Oh yeah, definitely felt it settling. As we're getting to the end of the battery, we're definitely feeling a difference in the performance here. It's gonna, oh yeah, dropping down in there, I have to really sort of get on the throttle, and it's taking longer to sort of catch itself. It's not just snap, catching itself instantly. All right, let's call that. Let's not just go forever. We'll just call that the end. 6 minutes to like hitting 3.5 on the throttle punches and sort of coasting at 3.55. Only 25%. So about 5% difference in the throttle position. Maybe a little, maybe 23% depending. About 5% difference in the throttle position. Throttle punch. Whoo! Oh, we're still going up. Wow. And just immediately, this feels like a much more powerful quadcopter compared to the 5-inch. When I catch myself at the bottom of a dive, I'm catching myself lower in the throttle. I don't have to raise the throttle as much. I know all of these words I'm saying just amount to it has more thrust, which you kind of know, but it's the subjective experience of how it feels. It doesn't feel like I'm slogging around a ton of weight like it did with the 5-inch. It's still not snappy like the 5-inch. Like, it still doesn't accelerate. Does it? It's easier to catch myself at the bottom, that's for sure. It doesn't seem like it accelerates the same. Maybe that's the responsiveness of the props. You would think that more thrust would mean more acceleration. In that kind of move, yes. It doesn't like have the same... In a move like that, it doesn't seem to like snap. I'm not sure how to put it. But when I just get on the throttle, it clearly has more thrust and can go faster, easier. I can tell you that between the 5-inch and this one, with this amount of weight, I would much rather sort of subjectively have this one, even though the handling is different. Like, it doesn't have the same, like, jerk me around feel. What if we go do some turns here? Of course, we're higher in the battery now. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going as fast, though. I feel more confident for sure. Oh, no, I'm going faster for sure. Because it feels more confident in the turns. It's not blowing out the turns. And it's more predictable. It feels smoother and more predictable. Oh yeah, this is way better. I'm not gonna fly them the same. They're not gonna feel the same. But like, it's pretty clear to me which one of these experiences is more enjoyable, because the thrust on the 5-inch, it was just working so hard in the throttle to get where it was. It was better than I thought it would be. But the 6-inch, it just feels more capable. Coming down out of the trees like that, I don't feel like I'm worried about hitting the ground. It just stops. I think we'll about call it there. That seems, well, 355, 356. That seems pretty close to the end. 7 minutes. We'll call it. And land. Recover to 3.6, roughly. So which of these two quadcopters is the one that you should buy if you're thinking about buying one? And I would like to say that you're not going to go wrong with either of them, especially given the price is pretty competitive. Especially if you get the analog version, the price comes down a lot. I think that the 5-inch is going to be perfect for somebody who wants a light, nimble, sort of pure freestyle drone, especially when you're flying it without a GoPro, because the O3 gives you plenty good video. The weight comes in well under 700 grams. And to me, 700 grams is the threshold where a 5-inch really comes into its own, if you're under 700 grams. Every sort of 10 or 20 grams above 700 you get, it still flies okay, but it gets just a little bit worse. It is so nimble. It is so light. It flicks around, and you can just do damn near anything you want with it. Even if you are going to carry a GoPro, you still have a pretty good flying quadcopter. But the more weight that you're going to add, and the more you're going to want to go to like a bigger battery, maybe you don't like an 1100 or a 1300 6S, maybe you want like a 15, 16, 1800 milliamp hour 6S. As you get into that situation, if you're the kind of person who likes, you know, an 800, 850 gram quad and you dig the way it flies, I think you should be thinking about whether the 6-inch makes sense for you, because it's going to handle that weight just a little better. And no, we didn't see significantly longer flight times on the 6-inch versus the 5-inch when we loaded it down to that 1+ kilogram weight. I mean, so I land a minute early and I change batteries and I get back in the air. I think I'd need to see more of a difference there to really feel like the battery life alone was worth choosing the 6-inch over the 5-inch. But the way that it flies the way that it flies under weight, you have much more feeling of control because you're not sort of like really pushing into the mid-throttle position just to catch it at the bottom of drop, just to get it moving. You're not going to full throttle just to push it to get it going. With the 6-inch, it's got more thrust, and you can really feel that when you're flying it. So in short, the heavier you're going to go, the more the 6-inch starts to make sense. And frankly, could you put 5-inch props on the 6-inch frame? You could. 2407, 1750 kV, 1960 kV. That's 200 more kV for the 5-inch versus the 6-inch. Yeah, it's not going to feel like there's a thing people did for a while is they take a 6-inch frame, they put 5-inch props on it. You get some of the responsiveness of a 5-inch, some of the nimbleness, but you still have like that wide wheelbase to give you some stability. You won't have the weight carrying capacity, but if you did buy the 5-inch quadcopter or the 6-inch quadcopter, it might be worth trying 5 or 5.5-inch props on it just to see if it gets you that little bit closer to that 5-inch sort of capability. This flight controller can't do 8S, can it? Because like this 6-inch with 5-inch props on an 8S battery would slay. I don't know about that. I have to check it. I bet it's not 8S capable. Whichever one of these you decide that is right for you, there are links in the video description. I encourage you to use those links because they're affiliate links, and that means whenever you click that link, and then you make any purchase at the affiliated store, I get a little commission. It's one of the easiest ways for you to support the channel. It doesn't cost you anything extra. Just take the time to go use that affiliate link whenever you buy something at any of the stores, any of the affiliated stores. All the links down below are their affiliate links. Get FPV, Race Day Quads, etc. All the stores. You just help me out by clicking those links. It makes a big difference. Speaking of 8S, if you want a quadcopter that can really carry the weight and just teleport from point A to point B at the touch of a throttle, you should check out an 8S quadcopter. Because yes, larger props give you more thrust and it let you carry, you know what else? Higher voltage. And you're not giving up anything in terms of responsiveness when you go with a 5-inch quadcopter on 8S. I'm going to put 2 videos on screen. One is an 8S quadcopter that I built myself, and you can build if you want to. And one is an 8S bind and fly from a company called Secure that you may know from their soldering irons. Before you spend any money on another 6S quadcopter, you should at least watch one of these videos, if not both. And I'm not saying everybody who watches them is going to go, oh, 8S is for me, because there's definitely some downsides. But boy, there are some upsides. Cards on screen and links in the video description below if you, for some reason you can't see the cards. I'll see you there.